So today I would like to talk about representations of old age in photography. Today we face in society aging of the population, and of course it influences the artists. So everyone, so we can see the influence in fashion photography, in art photography, in conceptual and documentary. So in each kind of photography we can see different approaches to the representation of elderly people. So, and also in this exhibition we have several artists who work with this topic. And after my talk, after my lecture, we will discuss with the artists their projects and their approaches, and you can meet the artists and ask them about their projects. I would like to start from fashion photography. I think it's quite important part of photography, and today art also influences fashion so much, so we can see not only art, of course, our current affair influences fashion. And in fashion photography we see more and more elderly faces. Older people are no more ignored by fashion industry. In the last 5 years, we see more and more elderly models in advertisement campaigns. This trend is called Renaissance. It's already existing term in fashion studies. Gray means that the models have gray hair, silver hair models. And in Instagram you can find this hashtag Renaissance. The trend called Renaissance has started 2015 when the 80-year-old author Jean Didion became the face of the campaign of Celine, and Saint Laurent hired the singer and songwriter Joni Mitchell, 71 years old, for its own campaign. Since then, the trend has spreading. Suddenly, fashion world became interested in women in their 70s and even 80s. They are on magazine covers, in editorials. They are selected for beauty campaigns of world-known cosmetic brands. Just a few examples in my presentation. For instance, the recent campaign of Sephora. You can see here the elderly couple and the elderly models. And the recent campaign of Volkswagen, they also made for this campaign love story, but it's unusual choice. They have chosen the elderly couple for this campaign. This elderly couple, they became the symbols of freedom, love, spontaneity, romantic. All of these values are represented by elderly people. Instagram is also, a couple of another examples of magazine covers who use models, even 90 years old women, or Harper's Bazaar special diversity issue. And Instagram also is today also a big platform for gray hair influencers. For instance, Lynn Slater, who is a 60-year-old professor from New York, Maya Mask or the well-known Iris Apfel, also from New York. They all have about 1 million of followers, some more, some less. And the main part of their followers, they are under 30 years old. So they became really fashionable and popular. Of course, there are a lot of small influencers who has 20 or 30,000 of followers on Instagram, and they are also in their 60s and 70s, and they won't be seen so much as possible and get contracts with cosmetics and fashion companies. That's Alison Walsh, gray hair activist and Insta-blogger, and she wrote in her article for Guardian that one of the most problem that aged people, especially women, they became a fetish. Model with gray hair, so, but almost all of them, they are in their 70s or 60s, and it creates an age gap, so we still end up with extremes, and we see models, young models who are in their 20s, and then we see the women in their 70s, so middle age is not present in the campaigns. Young and sexy, or old and represented like fetish, so that's the main problem. Other activists, they mentioned that these models, elderly models, they represent only one type of women. So they are all tall, slim, and with long silver hair. That simply isn't true about most of older women. But the industry, the fashion industry, they created a new fashion identity. This fetishized elderly starlet. And when fashion says that it's about diversity, it's not really about diversity, but it's already one step in this direction. It's about redefining what we as a society are considering to be beautiful. When I grow up, I want to look like you. That's usual comment which we can see under posts in Instagram of these elderly influencers. So you can say that they also work with the big fear of our society to be old. So because the image of old age is not so, it wasn't so good. And today, these elderly models, they represent another type of aging, a good aging, a glamorous aging. I always see such comments under the photos of stylish, glamorous elderly people. Oh, that's an old lady which I want to be you. So, or thank you, I'm not scared of old age anymore. So you can say that these influencers, they became not just persons, they are symbols, they are tokens of which is meant to prove that everything will be okay when you are old. There is another term in fashion studies already, and it's called granny chic. So it doesn't mean granny chic is not about girls who wear something like from granny's old trunk. It's when an elderly woman like Iris Apfel, 93, they wear something really bright and they don't care what others say. So so-called granny became a new rebel, a new punk. And so, for instance, she mixes really bright colors and textures and styles all together, breaking all the existing fashion rules. I don't have any rules because I would just end up breaking them. So it's a waste of time. So that's the words of Iris Apfel. In the book Fashioning Identity, the author, Maria McKinney-Valentine, mentions that 50-year-old women, 50-year-old models are still mostly invisible in the fashion world. At castings, they are always told that they look too young. Actually, they should come in 10, 20 years, and then they will be in fashion. And McKinley-Valentine also introduces such a term like to be perfectly wrong. So it means that sometimes you are just wrong when you are 50, and you are perfectly wrong when you are 70. So it's already in fashion, in vogue. When you have gray hair and look like these influencers. And I would like to show you the recent campaign of Gucci, which was shot by legendary New York photographer Bruce Gilden. So I think that's the right step in the direction to diversity. This photographer, Bruce Gilden, is the street photographer, and this campaign is also made in street style. So, and the second part of my talk, I would like to talk about art and documentary photography, because it's also a very important part of today's imagery. So from the 70s, aging and death became a legitimate subject for photographers who work with books, photo books, and gallery exhibitions. Before that, we had not so much projects about aging and death. And I will talk today about this example. That's the photo from the project by Philip Toledano. His personal exhibition was several years ago in Deichtorhallen in Hamburg. And this project was also on display, among others. So, till 70s, we can say that aging and death as a phenomenon disappeared from daily life in the Western world. And for instance, dying people, they were displaced into hospitals and hospices. The deceased were hidden in morgues, and cemeteries were moved outside of the cities. After the publication of the book, Awareness of Dying by Barney Glaser and Anselm Strauss, it was 1965. It was crucial for there to be an alteration in the attitude of the society to death. The authors encouraged doctors in America to break the rule of silence and to let know the dying patients about their real condition. So they could make their last end-of-life choices. Within that context, photography became a tool for relatives and even for the persons themselves to depict those last days with the help of the camera, and therefore save the memories. So we can see plenty of documentary projects which depict the last days of elderly relatives of the photographers. And these documentary projects which deal with this topic, they often have the same structure, irrespective of the reason of the approaching death, be it cancer or old age. The plot of such projects often is quite monotonous. It's just depiction of daily life. And the central drama here is the life which is fading away. Photographers start a visual discussion about identity and decay and individual dramatic confrontation with mortality. In American photography, one can see a big amount of documentary and art series of elderly relatives. For instance, these well-known touching glass portraits of the elderly father of Richard Avedon, which were made in the last years of his life. Very well known. You see that's the beginning of 70s. Which I just have shown as the project by Philip Toledano, Days with My Father. That's documentary project, or the project by Colin Gray, In Sickness and in Health, or also about his parents, or the conceptual experiment by Eileen Smithson, Arrangement in Green and Black, about her mother, or another conceptual experiment, reenactment, about a dying friend by Drew Donovan, also American photographer. And this well-known project, The Mother's Project by Tierney Geron, or having its roots in phototherapy, autobiographical series like the one by Patricia Leigh Dorsey, or even Rosie Martin. So one can summarize it that we face this photographical exploration of life in death in contemporary photography, and mostly in contemporary American photography. So, and of course, I can tell that the roots of this sincerity, we can find it in the work of Nan Goldin, who captured herself and her friends in the most vulnerable moments. And in the works of Larry Clark, with his very controversial, non-censored style. One can call it a raw insider approach. And such sincere, touching photos, they can happen even if the photographer is insider. So he's not coming from outside to have a look at what's happening. Actually, the photographer should relate to this situation as a relative, as a friend, as a daughter or a son. This photography shows no boundaries. It shows the unpleasant, shocking, painful, and creepy, sometimes that we don't want to look at it. often we want to turn away. But quite often these photographs are very beautiful, or they were taken with humor, because there is already plenty to cry about. This photography also can be defined as a therapy for the model and for the photographer. And this look through the lens, it definitely helps the photographer to cope with this situation, because a look through the lens, it gives a certain detachment of the situation from what's happening. And we gain the illusion of activity at a time when it's no longer possible to help. All in all, if in modern fashion photography we are seeing elderly faces, but they are still much more glamorous and glossy and even young. And in documentary and art photography, we see the aging as it is, non-filtered, non-censored, even if we are sometimes reluctant to look at it. I will now focus on two projects which, in my opinion, represent the two main approaches to aging representation. It's the classic documentary and the conceptual project. A Son's Photo Diary by Philippe Toledano, Days with My Father, tells a story about the last 3 years of life of the elderly father. After the death of the mother of the photographer, he started to photograph his father, who has Alzheimer, and who actually forgot about the death of his wife. He lost his memory, and he asked the photographer all the time where his wife is. He lost his short-term memory. So Philip started a blog when he wrote the diary about his father, and posted every day, and he posted every day the photos which documented the condition of life of the father. So we see the father who is very fragile and vulnerable and weak, in need of care and protection. And the son describes how he attempts to protect his father from the external world by creating an artificial world for him with nothing bad and scaring. So like childhood-like world. In this project, there are many close-ups, portraits of the father. A viewer may approach the character from the very close distance, very intimate distance. And we are not just watching, we are involved in what is happening. So we are not just observers, we are participants. And on some portraits, the father is looking directly on us, on the observer, and this kind of contact, eye to eye, is defined as demand. So that's the demand of attention, participation, and a direct challenge from a depicted person, fully aware of being photographed. He directly communicates with the viewer, who is forced to interact. The sequence of Philippe Toledano's photographs doesn't have a classic plot, like with climax and falling and rise in action. The narrative is straightforward. A viewer follows the daily life of the elderly man through his portraits and fragments of his environment. There is not evident collision. The character remains in the same place, in the same room, so the whole project is made in only one room of the father. And the environment doesn't change. It's only his emotions which change during the project. And it's permanent anticipation of the end, which builds the plot of the project. Every day for the son and every photo for the viewer. It turns out into an expectation. What if this was the last one? That restless process turns into suspense for the viewer, involving him in this state of expectation of the end. After viewing the entire project, the title picture of the mask, with the mask, gains a new level of understanding. It becomes a metaphor of the father passing to another world and represents sleep as death. But death also becomes here a departure to Paris. According to the story, Philip made up for his father, the mother, who actually died. He flew to Paris and is now living in Paris. So Toledano chose this photo as an opening one. A man sleeping in the chair. It looks like a plane passenger. And the last sentence in his diary is, "Now he's gone to Paris to meet my mom." That was the last words in the son's diary. Another project, the conceptual one I want to show you today, is the project Arrangement in Green and Black by the American photographer Ellen Smithson. She photographed her 85-year-old mother. The project lies in between documentary and conceptual photography, and it resembles the well-known portrait of James Whistler, Arrangement in Grey and Black, portrait of the artist's mother. It was made in the Victorian epoch, and the composition is the same. So she wanted to recreate this composition, but in very postmodern manner. So for 2 years, Smithson was looking for and buying different props in garage sales, and she photographed her mother in different looks. There is very different characters, like, for instance, a Japanese geisha, or Elvis Presley, or belly dancer. And so she made about 20 photographs, 20 portraits. And sometimes, of course, these portraits could look like exploitation of the look of the elderly woman, because actually he didn't understand that good how would he look on the photographs. But Ellen Smithson explains that it was a kind of game or a home theater for them, and it was also a kind of therapy for the photographer and for the mother, because they made these photos every day, and the mother was happy to put this makeup and to wear these clothes and to make these looks, and it was something what was very important to her. So Smithson made 20 portraits and until her mother gone. So she didn't see these portraits, I think. Yes, so actually it was something that brought joy and laughter into their lives when there was plenty to cry about. Such projects, they seldom depict evident process of aging itself. We see actually already elderly people, and we can follow only the last years of their lives. And there is another group of projects where, for instance, the very well-known project by Nicholas Nixon, which consists of the portraits of his wife and her siblings, taken every year since 1974. So we can follow the age-related alterations of these women. And in this series, which I have shown you today, the characters, they don't change much. They are introduced already as elderly persons, and they are fading away to the end. And aging is interpreted as the last period of life. And photography becomes here not just memory preserving, but also means to save the disappearing matter. And it also provides a way to communicate with the dying relatives, and it's definitely kind of therapy for the photographer and his elderly model. All in all, there are plenty of forms of representation of aging in contemporary photography, and each genre deals with that problem in its own way: fashion, art, documentary, and conceptual. And in 10 minutes, I'm inviting you to join our artist talk with the photographers of True Stories exhibition, who also deal with this topic in different ways. The artists Heidi Krautwald and Magdalena Stengel, and the art historian Hannah Barrow. We will discuss our works and this topic in general. So now I can answer your questions actually, and after that you can have a look at their projects. The project of Heidi Krautwald is right here in the exhibition site, and the project of Magdalena Stengel is upstairs on this wall, and you can also have a look at my project. The Old World is also here upstairs. So I'm ready for your questions.